Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch. I'm the sports editor at Star Local Media, and I am being joined by Devin Hassan, sports editor for the Mesquite News and the Rowlett Lakeshore Times, as well as Taylor Ragland, who writes sports for the Plano Star-Courier, Allen American, and Lake City Sun. And gentlemen, let's keep discussing high school football. We are just a little over, 2 weeks out, and I guess now from the start of the season, a little under 2 weeks, but now we're going to, as we've done these past few weeks on the podcast, we're going to keep discussing stuff in anticipation of the upcoming season. We've been going, district by district, classification by classification. We've discussed 5A, we've discussed 4A, we even threw the private schools a bone at the start of this whole thing, and now we are left with our 4 6A districts. So let's dive into the biggest classification of them all. Today we're going to discuss, we're actually going to combo up a couple of those districts today. We're going to discuss districts 10 6A and 11 6A, so a very East Dallas County centric podcast, a very Devin Hassan centric podcast. Yeah. It's going to be the Devin Hassan show for the next 30-40 minutes as we discuss the year 2 core 6A districts, 2 districts that you know inside and out and have for quite some time. So let's dive right into it, man. Let's talk District 10-6A, the Garland ISD district, with a little bit of an outsider coming in a little bit. So this district, for those who don't recall what Garland ISD consists of, it is Rowlett, Sachse, Garland, Lakeview Centennial, Naaman Forest, North Garland, South Garland, and then making their. Is this the first time they've been in the Garland ISD district?
In at least a couple decades, okay. Yeah. Which given the fact that they border Sachse, you would think that over time, just on various realignments, particularly when they had fewer than 7 GISD schools. But yeah, it's been a while.
We're talking about Wiley for that.
Yeah.
for that.
Because there is confusion outside the Metroplex on anytime they say Rowlett and Sachse, people don't realize that they're part of Garland ISD.
Yeah. But yes, Wiley is making the shift over from I guess much easier from a travel standpoint, and should make for a should level out the playing field in that district quite a bit, at least with Wiley having to soldier through the Allen Plano district in 6-6A these past 2 years. So let's dive right into this district, as has been the case for all of these district preview podcasts. We're going to focus primarily on the teams that fall within our coverage area. So for this, we're going to discuss primarily Rowlett and Sachse. We're going to go for each team. We'll talk about kind of the biggest storyline heading into the season for each team, plus kind of Devin's general outlook and what he expects out of these those 2 teams that he'll be covering primarily. And then once we're done with that, then we'll look at some more district-wide projections. We'll give you one game to watch, the key game to watch out of District 10-6A, and then round it out with Devin's projected top 4. Who does he think is going to make the playoffs right now as the season gets underway next week? And then we'll do the entire thing on the back half of the podcast talking about 11-6A. So let's start with the defending district champion, the Sachse Mustangs. Devin, just talk a little bit about Sachse coming off their best season ever. What is the biggest storyline as they try to build off of that miraculous 2017 season? Well,
like you mentioned, they raised the bar last season, making it to the regional semifinals for the first time in school history. That was their expectation. I mean, they entered the year with those kind of expectations. Just a ton of Division I talent over there, and they lived up to it for the most part. And were nearly mid-stage that miraculous comeback in the semifinals against Fliville Henderson to make it to the regional finals. So I think the big storyline this year is how do you replace that talent, and particularly at quarterback. Jalen Maiden was a 3-year starter. He's now at Mississippi State. Just a dynamic playmaker, and really a guy who took the reins, from his first start his sophomore year. They don't have Jalen Maiden. I mean, they lost a lot of talent, but Jalen Maiden was kind of the guy that made that team go, especially on offense. So I'm really kind of curious to see how they tailor their offense around there's plenty of good parts, but how they tailor their the offense around what they have returning. Anthony Beltran was the backup last year. He wasn't asked to do much. He mostly came in on mop-up duty, and they're up by 50 points a lot of times when he comes in. So his job was to hand the ball off. So he has a full off season of work. They've worked a couple other kids in there as well that if that's not the answer, that may step in. Whoever does take snaps is going to have a ton of talent around him. They did graduate Christian Cole, who was the Offensive Player of the Year last year. Rushed for 1,700 yards. But what they did is they slid Miles Nash from wide receiver to running back. And Miles Nash is a shorter guy in stature, about 5'8", but just an absolute burner. Playmaker, I mean, he flashed that last year playing wide receiver, expected to be the lead back. They're also going to line him up in the slot, so they're going to take advantage of his pass catching abilities as well. So Miles Nash, is going to be kind of one of those breakout players, I think, in the area this year. Torrey Washington was a backup last year that flashed his potential as well. He'll get some touches in the backfield. Their wide receiver, they lose Drew Jackson, but they have a very seasoned core coming back with guys like Derrick Rose, guys like Trent Dean, guys like Cameron Cromer. They always have guys, waiting to step up to these younger guys like Cameron Quinn. So we'll see what happens there. Their offensive line is young. Coach Barons, Mark Red Barons, the head coach over at Sachse, he was pleased though how they developed over in the offseason with guys like Larry Wynn, Joshua Velasquez, Latrey Harris, who I believe was about 365. I mean, he's an imposing figure. I mean, he's a 6'3", 6'4", 360. He's easy to pick out when you're watching from the press box, looking at it in preseason warm-ups. So, so whoever steps in at quarterback is that transition is going to be eased by the fact that the skill pieces around them are very good. Again, though, it's still going to be a big key because there's no Jalen Maiden to turn to when they had to last year in games against Rowlett, in their playoff game against Rockwall, when he was able to basically single-handedly kind of lead them back from deficits.
What is kind of the biggest part of Maiden's skill set that you think that offense is going to miss heading into the season?
He stepped in as a sophomore incredibly poised. I mean, he was a dual threat, but he knew when to take off. He knew when to stay in the pocket. You don't see that from a lot of sophomores, and certainly by his senior year, he had that, down really well. He just kind of had that sense. And I mentioned the Rowlett game last year. There were games where he didn't have any carries. There were games where he didn't attempt a single pass. It all depended on how the game went, what the game plan was. But when he needed to, he knew when to put the team on his shoulders. And so I think that's the element they're going to miss most is just his leadership and just kind of his instinctiveness there, taking snaps.
What do you think the odds are on another hip hop track being recorded by the players this season?
Well, I don't know because I think Jalen was one of those that was on the track last year, so I don't know how many of their musicians.
They're just going to carry it down. They're just going to pass it on down to the underclassmen. Become a program tradition.
It may be. But we'll see what happens. I don't think any tracks are going to be laid down real early, but if they get to be 7 or 8-0, then we may have a
wrapping up these games at halftime like they did.
I don't know. Yeah.
So kind of on that note, though, I'd imagine expectations are kind of, a little bit different than they were. Because I don't know, did they expect last season to have the kind of year that they did? Was there kind of this vibe around the team at this time a year ago that they would be capable of what they did, or?
They did. I think, it was hard to say because so many of their games were lopsided in district last year. But they won the first round playoff game, and then they played the Woodlands, who was state ranked and undefeated, and they were ahead in the fourth quarter of that game. And I think, and that was a lot of juniors on that team. And I think that kind of proved to themselves that they can compete with the best teams in the state, and that carried over. Yeah. I don't think you could, and every coach and every player is going to tell you, we're not going to take a step back. We're not going to lower our expectation level just because we've lost some guys. Yeah. And, have to, you recycle every year, and you have to go through, And I think, again, there may not be the amount of D1 talent on the opposite side of the ball that they had a year ago, but their defense has a lot of talent as well. And people get caught up in the averaging 50 points a game type thing, but their defense is salty. I mean, defensive line, they returned Hunter Spears. He's a Notre Dame commitment. He missed all of last season with an injury, worked hard in the offseason. Actually, if they would have made it a little bit further, it was that there was a possibility he could have contributed if the playoff run went late enough. But he's a tremendous talent. He had a huge sophomore year. Clark Yarborough is another guy who was part of that rotation last year. Josh Stafford got some snaps, and it was really tough to break into that defensive line rotation. I mean, they have 4 guys that went to college, based off that line, and obviously Hunter Spears is committed to Notre Dame. So it was a tough rotation to break into. But both those guys were contributors. Their linebacker core should be good. Bryce Robinson is a Texas Tech commit. Matthew Carter was one of their primary backup running back last year and did a really good job, but he's actually being moved over to kind of a rover position on defense this year. Their secondary should be solid. Micah Buchanan at safety was an all-district performer, and Coach Barons was really excited about Braylon Brooks and P.J. Barber, his 2 cornerbacks. He thinks that they could be the best, set of cornerbacks that Sachse's had in quite some time.
That was the thing that kind of struck me, not knowing a whole lot about Sachse and not being here last year. They returned just 9 starters, I think, at least as far as Dave Campbell's, their listing of, and it's not as many as, we see some teams with obscene numbers, 15, 16, 17 starters coming back, but it seems like they return the right starters to be still balanced. Looking at their defense and their offense and who they have coming back, a lot of time you see teams bringing back less than 10 starters and, okay, well, they're all on offense, or, they're all on defense, or, there's a huge glaring hole, but it seems like they're still pretty well set up across, all 22 starting positions with guys moving up and all that kind of stuff. So for a team that loses, obviously, a QB and a huge talent, but brings back enough to still be pretty balanced.
And it's they employ a lot of rotations anyway. But I guess if there is a benefit to being up 51-0 in the third quarter,
right,
is you rotated a lot of guys.
You get to build that depth.
These guys, these sophomores and whatnot, these guys who were quote unquote on the second team, third team, they got a lot of snaps last year.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so that experience is going to pay dividends, hopefully for them this year.
So as far as just kind of an outlook, though, I mean, with what they accomplished last year, advancing to the regional semifinals, do you foresee a similar run like that this season? I would assume that they are still probably the odds-on favorite to repeat out of that district. But as far as kind of big picture expectations, at least from your vantage point, what do you kind of see out of Saxe?
I think they certainly have the potential. Again, I do think it's going to come down to that quarterback position,
right.
and it's just there's really nothing to go on at this point because there's going to come a point in time. I mean, like you say, they probably are the preseason favorite. I don't think there's any question they're going to be one of the 4 playoff teams at the end. Yeah. But when in the playoffs, you kind of have to have that guy at quarterback that can, like Jalen Maiden did, kind of take the reins and lead that team to a victory. So it's going to be a work in progress. We're going to see how it develops.
And if there was a team, though, in that district that, like last year, that could have almost thrown a monkey wrench into that run through the district, it was certainly those Rowlett Eagles who gave them all they could handle last season. And let's just kind of shift then gears to talk about Rowlett. Just talk a little about the Eagles, Devin, and what is the biggest storyline heading into their season?
I want to see if they can take the next step back toward being a district championship type team. They were an odd team to watch last year. They went 1-3 in non-district, and they go out and they lose to Louisville, and you kind of scratch your head. But then they come right back and beat Rockwall, a very good Rockwall team. And you go, okay, maybe this is the real Rowlett.
Yeah, that result still looks confusing now in hindsight.
And then they lose their next 2, and you just you don't know what to make of that team. And then they took care of business, but it wasn't like they were just overwhelming people in district. And you thought, oh gosh, here we go. They run into Saxe. I think that I think it was 8-0 against 4-4 or something like that. And Rowlett's up 35-21 in the fourth quarter before Saxe was able to rally with 21 points late. So it was really confusing, especially as someone who did see that Rockwall game and who did see him at other times, kind of look like they're trying to find themselves, but then saw how they played Saxe, and you just kind of go, okay, where's the real? You see the potential, but what's the real team? So I want to see if they can kind of establish that identity early on this year. They always test themselves pretty well in non-district. Obviously the game with Rockwall is always a big one, and they've got 12 returning starters, so there is some stability. They graduated Preston Weeks at quarterback. Chase Topol last year, who was the backup, but Preston Weeks got hurt late in the season, and so he played the last 2.5 games and showed some promise. And that experience, talking to Coach Doug Stevens, he said, it wasn't a lot of experience, but just kind of dipping your toe in the water, so to speak, and being out there on that field and kind of experiencing what it was like, especially, it being one of those games was a playoff game. I think that's gonna pay big dividends for him. They have an outstanding running back in Chauncey Amos, who pretty much was a split time last year, but is going to probably take over full-time duties this year. Antonio Hull at wide receiver was the offensive sophomore of the year last year. Jerry Evans caught 34 passes. He's another guy that's been a reliable target out there. So, Chase Topol, they were pleased with how he developed in the offseason. They were kind of, they were optimistic about what they saw from him in limited time there. So if they can continue to progress, their offensive line is young, but Coach Stevens said they have a lot of promise. And, that's just it's going to be one of those things for the first month. That's going to be learning on the job type of thing. But I think their offense is going to be certainly capable on defense. That in the trenches is similar to the offensive line. A lot of new guys, but they do have a lot of potential. Jeremiah Franks, Gabriel Tito, players like that who were part of the rotation last year. Linebacker. They lost their 2 top tacklers from last year. DeModrick Wade is back. He was an all-district performer. I'm really excited about their secondary, just to see what they can do, especially in this day of pass happy and having to corral these 5 receiver sets, because they have 3 good ones in Lance Canyon, Jared Wesley, Cameron Miles, and other guys ready to step up. So I think the defense could be a strength as well.
As far as obviously, it's fair to say that last year, Sachse versus Rowlett was kind of the big game to watch in that district. Was the best game played in that district. So I don't know. As far as if you were to pick one game to watch though in that district schedule, is it the annual Rowlett Sachse showdown? Is there another one that's kind of on your radar? Where'd you fall on this?
There's some intriguing non-district games. I'm really kind of fascinated by the whole Sachse-Euless Trinity matchup. They've never met, and it's just two teams that really kind of clash philosophically in what they do. That's intriguing. The Lake Ray Hubbard rivalry with Rowlett and Rockball is always good, but no, there's no question. The game to watch is Sachse and Rowlett, which this year just so happens to fall on the last day of the regular season. So November 9th at Homer B. Johnson Stadium. Again, last year was just a classic, 42-35. Sachse's able to pull it out, and it goes beyond bragging rights. It could be for the district title again. I think it will likely be for the district title again, but people also overlook it's a seeding thing a lot of times.
Right.
And last year that meant the difference, between playing Lake Highlands and Coppell. Well, if you look at this now at the new landscape here, that could mean the difference between playing Team B or Allen.
Right.
And no team wants to play Allen.
Select Team B every time.
Certainly not in the first round.
Yeah.
So, that
didn't seem to hurt Rowlett last time it happened.
Well, I think Allen got the revenge a couple of years later. But yeah, you can't always hope to pull an upset that people are still talking about 10 years later. But no, that's November 9th. Again, it's always bragging rights. These two schools are just a few miles apart. A big chunk of Sachse students live in Rowlett, and that's just the way they're zoned. And it's bragging rights, could be district title, and again, that all-important seed. So that's your game to watch.
And last year you learned that no matter what the trajectory is of those two heading in, that it is the classic, the old tried and true cliche of throwing the record books out.
Yes.
So then, as far as obviously, it sounds like you assume that Rowlett and Sachse are going to both figure into the playoff equation within this district. How about the other two teams? Where did you land on your preliminary top four out of this district?
I think there's a lot more questions. I think across the board this year, I think there's going to be more parity than there has been in the last couple of years. I don't know if that's going to change the playoff order, though.
Right.
I do still have Sachse at 1. they're undefeated the last 2 years until somebody throws them. You can't really pick anything. And I still think they have the talent, based on what we just talked about, to repeat. I do still think that Rowlett is that second team. There's enough talent in that system that they're going to be there year in, year out. After that, I think it plays out really similar. I think Naaman Forest finished third. They're a playoff team back-to-back years after a long drought. They return 16 starters.
I was going to say they bring back a lot.
Yeah. And they run the wing T. And I know we've talked about on other podcasts how difficult that is
when you don't
for
see it
teams
every
to prepare
week.
for because you just don't see it. And trying to implement a strategy to slow that down in 1 week is really tough. And they return 3. They have a new quarterback this year, but they return 3 key cogs in Jordan Bowes, Lemuel Adams, and Donovan Lee. And in the wing T, you're always rotating backs in and out. So they got an explosive athlete in D.A. McCartney, who is actually an outstanding track athlete as well. Their defense again has 8 starters back, and that was kind of their backbone. They grind you with those 8, 9, 10-minute drives on offense, keeps the defense fresh, but then the defense does a good job of getting that, the opponents, right back off the field. Some of these guys, which is kind of a rarity in 6A, Bowes and Lee, for instance, play both ways at linebacker. So that's part of the reason they rotate them up so often. So I had them third, slight edge over Lakeview. I'm really concerned, or I'm really not concerned, I'm really interested to see what Lakeview does, and specifically Kamar Wheaton, who came in as a freshman late last year, rushed for 439 yards against Jesuit in their playoff game, again, as a freshman, medaled at the state track meet in the 200 meters, just speedster. He's going to be the featured back this year, and I'm really curious to see what he can do given that featured role. Jarrett Adams is back at quarterback. Again, 12 starters overall. So I think I give Lakeview the edge on fourth. I know Wiley, coming into the district, I know they have a good quarterback in Rashad Dixon, Donovan Ali at wide receiver. I don't know if they have enough overall, though. It's going to be hard to see how they, equate. South Garland, Jaquarian Turner might be the best running back in the district. when it's all said and done. I mean, he had 18.
Statistically, yeah, he was one of the best in the state last year.
He had 1,800 yards last season, even though he was really the only consistent option that South Carolina had. And defenses knew that if you're going to slow South Carolina down, you're going to have to slow him down, and he still was able to produce. North Garland's kind of been on an uptick of late. It just hasn't always translated into a lot of victories. They returned 15 starters. I don't know if they have enough to get back or to get into that playoff conversation. Same with Garland. They have 9 guys back. They've kind of hit a lull here these last 2 or 3 years. And I've heard good things about their freshman JV classes, but I don't know if that's going to equate to being part of that, being in the playoff race this year. So yeah, mine is Sachse, Rowlett, Naaman, Lakeview. A lot more competition, a lot more exciting games this year, but I still think it plays out the same way it did last year.
That's a look at District 10 6A. Obviously got another district on the docket for Devin to wax philosophically on. We'll give you a chance to catch your breath as we take a break, and then once we come back, after a word from the sponsor, we will touch on District 11 6A. Today's Student Athlete Spotlight is brought to you by Bavarian Grill, authentic Bavarian food and beer garden. Listed by the Zagat survey as the highest rated German restaurant in Texas for 12 years in a row. 12 years! That's 3 presidential terms. You can enjoy traditional and authentic spring favorites now. Everything from appetizers like slow roasted ham hock and potato pancakes to entrees like bratwurst or breaded schnitzel. Bring your whole family for lunch and dinner. They are open Tuesday through Saturday, located off Parker and Highway 75 in Plano. Bavarian Grill. And now, let's get back to the podcast. And let's continue with a look at District 11 6A. We're going to shift a little bit further out east and talk about some Mesquite ISD action. Show those schools some love. For those who do not know, District 11 6A of this year, very similar to the one last year, minus John Tyler, which is down in 5A. The other 7 teams are still intact. You got your Mesquite ISD trio of Mesquite, Horn, and North Mesquite. Still got Longview, I should say, the 2 Rockwall schools, Rockwall and Heath, and Tyler Lee as well to round out what should be another very fascinating, very competitive edition of District 11 6A football. Let's start in Mesquite ISD. Let's start with the original Mesquite High School. So talk about the Skeeters, Devin, and just what is as they enter year number 2 under Jeff Fleener, what is the biggest storyline for the Skeeters?
Improvement. It's they went 1-9 last season. There's always a transition period anytime you have a new coaching staff come in, particularly one that came in kind of late in the process. They didn't have a lot of time during the spring to really implement fully what they wanted to do. And talking with Coach Fleener, his main priority from the moment last season ended was to get stronger. He said, and he didn't mince words, he said we were physically not able to match up with other teams last year. He said, so that was our focus, was to win in the weight room in the off season. And he was really pleased with the team and the effort they put in to following through, to buying into what the coaching staff was selling. So I think you'll see a team that's much more prepared this year. And again, we'll have to see that they did their part of the off season in terms of what the coaching staff asked them to do. Now we'll see how that translates to success and to improvement in their on the field play. It'll be curious to see what they do on offense. They have a new quarterback. Arturo Flores is projected as the starter. He did some good things in the spring. They have a kid named Dylan McGill, though, who's a junior, who's going to get snaps. He's one of those guys that is a game breaker. I mean, he can play different positions, but they just need to find a way to get the ball in his hands. So expect to see a lot of him early on in the season as well. Cantrell Ray Jackson was their leading rusher last year. Ladarius Turner was another guy who contributed in the backfield. They're both back, so they have some experience in the backfield. The receiving corps, if you can find a quarterback that can get them the ball, could be pretty dynamic. I mean, Devin Davis is a college prospect. He's a 6'4" kid, can go up and get the ball. Jadarian Smith was one of their better players last year. DeKetrick Smith is a guy that's kind of opened some eyes during the spring. So they have a nice set of wide receivers. Also, one thing that they're going to kind of change this year is they're going to use more tight end sets. So a kid like Casey Freeman is going to be utilized a lot more. And since in this day and age of the spread, not a lot of teams see tight end sets, so they may be able to work him in and have him be a difference maker on there as well. Defensively, people talk about, there's a lack of talent. Well, that's certainly not the case on the defensive line. I think it was Lone Star Gridiron put out a list of their top 60 defensive line prospects in the state, and Mesquite had 3 of them. And I didn't see any other program on there that had 3 guys. That's Otay Baker. I'm going to butcher this. Seraton Obadiah. I'm sorry if I got that.
Apologies, Seraton.
Yes. And Jackson Turner. All three of those guys made the list. Jackson Turner's kind of their nose guard. He's the one that plugs up two blockers at a time and really frees it up for those two guys on the ends to make plays. And I mean, these guys were garnering college attention last year. Still, they're going to be probably 3 D1 kids on that defensive line, and that has a chance to really kind of set the tone, especially when you're trying to overturn a 1-9 season. Linebackers are young. They got guys like Alec Rice and Jaden Brown. And their defensive backfield, I think, should be much improved. Desmond Hall, Gary Green are guys that contributed last year. And then Chris Henry is a guy to keep an eye on. That the coaching staff, they named him the Blur, because they'll be watching film and all of a sudden they'll just see this blur shoot into the screen and just close on the running back, on the opposing receiver. So they think he has the potential to be a big time playmaker for them.
So as far as you talked about improvement, obviously being kind of at the forefront for Mesquite. So ultimately, what kind of, it's obviously expected that they should be better than last year. It'd be tough to fathom otherwise. To what extent do you see them though improving this season? What do you ultimately see for the Skeeters?
I think we'll learn a lot in their non-district schedule, because people approach non-district in different ways. Some people schedule tough because they want to play against the best and to kind of get battle tested. Some look at it as you always want to win, but they also look at it as a chance to work in some younger players. I think when you're coming off a 1-win season, it's really important to kind of instill that winning attitude and instill that confidence to guys that didn't enjoy a lot of it last year. So I think they're going to approach these first 3 games wanting to go out there and win. Not that every team does it, but I think it's very important to kind of get that confidence going, instill that winning attitude, and see if that carries over into district play.
Because if I'm looking over the schedule right now, they got Lake Highlands to open, Grand Prairie, Plano West, LD Bell. So as far as there's
it's winnable games. I mean, it's if they can come out of there 2-2 even. Just get that taste. Just get these kids a taste of winning. I think that could carry forward a long way in district.
A team that's on a bit of a different trajectory. One that won a district championship last year and had just another strong season out of Mesquite. Horn. Talk about the Horn Jaguars, Devin, as they prepare to defend I guess you could probably say in hindsight, maybe I don't know if it was an improbable district title, but certainly one that I think heading into the season, the expectations, at least externally, might have been a bit different.
Yeah, I think most people had them pegged as a playoff team for sure. I mean, they've been a perennial playoff team since 2008. The only question was they graduated Chris Robinson, who kind of rewrote the record book for them at quarterback, and no one was really quite sure what Jermaine Gibbons was going to do taking over as the starting quarterback, even though he'd showed some signs in limited time as a sophomore. Now the question is, what can he do for an encore? I mean, he throws for 2,628 yards and 29 touchdowns. Rushes for 1,200, almost 1,300 yards and 20 touchdowns.
Almost 50 touchdowns.
So 49 touchdowns in 12 games. So, shade over 4 a game. You're not going to find many, I can't think of one off the top of my head that averaged 4 touchdowns a game anywhere in the state.
You look at Lake Dallas and Ryan Deppersmith, I think he had 39, so 10 fewer for a guy that basically kind of fills a similar role for that team. So a whole 10 fewer touchdowns. So.
Yeah, and so like I say, he just took the district by storm last year with the district most valuable player. Again, what can he do for an encore? He's got good pieces around him too. It's not like they just snap the ball to him and say, Jermaine,
do stuff.
Just do your thing. Esias Taylor had a really good season at running the ball, 807 yards, 10 touchdowns. He's an excellent wide receiver too. He didn't get a chance to really do much in the receiving game in the passing game last year, but you saw glimpses and you saw it in 7-on-7. He was one of their top 7-on-7 players. So look for him to be involved in more in the passing game as well. They did graduate a couple key guys, their 2 leading receivers last year, but they've always been able to reload at wide receiver. Reagan Nickerson has experience. Nikowski Emery came on and got some experience last year. Donovan Payne, Cameron Jackson, Ben White is a transfer that's coming in that they're really, really excited about. So, Horn is kind of, this last decade has established themselves. It's kind of like Sachse, it's kind of in that same time frame as being one of the most exciting teams in terms of being able to put up points in the area, and I don't see that changing this year. Defensively, the big question mark is up front. Coach Overton was pretty pumped about some of the kids they have working into that rotation in the trenches, but again, they're still new. Their linebacker core should be outstanding. Kendrick Blackshire was the district newcomer of the year last year, 70 tackles as a freshman. You don't see freshmen stepping in and playing a pivotal role, especially at linebacker, middle linebacker on defense. But he's already got offers from all over Alabama's, and he's gonna, as just a sophomore, he's pretty much gonna have his pick of where he wants to go play college ball. DeAndre Warren is right there, Quavon Grant. These are two very, very good linebackers in their own right. Secondary, they did graduate 3 kids that are going to play college ball, so they're going to have to kind of reload there. Larry Donnell's back, which is big. He was an all-district performer. So again, I think that linebacker core is one of the best in the area, and that's going to, I guess, their strength in the middle is going to give them time to develop in other areres.
And of course, Horn always schedules a tough non-district schedule. And as far as, you mentioned some of those areas where, like the defensive line, where they maybe not entirely sure what they might have, and then you look at that opener against Allen, and that'll test you right out.
Yeah,
right out of the gates.
When your first 2 games are against reigning state champions, because they follow that up with Highland Park.
Yes.
So yeah, it's and Horn has not shied away from non-district matchups, and it's gotten them ready. I mean, there's been years that you look at their record at the end of the season, you kind of think, why, is this one of those 5-5, 6-4 teams going to the playoffs? But when you look at who their first 3 or 4 games were against, I mean, they could be 1-3 and still be considered one of the best teams in the area, just based on who they play.
Let's look at North Mesquite, a team that's kind of in a spot that I guess you could say that Mesquite was in at this time last year, as they acclimate to a new head coach, one that came along a little bit later in the offseason, and Tim Cedar, former Dallas Cowboy. Talk a little bit about the Stallions, Devin, and just kind of what the biggest plot line is entering their first year under Coach Cedar.
Developing an identity. It's the same. You mentioned the Mesquite. With Coach Fleener last year, Tim Cedar's familiar with that program. He was the defensive coordinator, assistant head coach at Horn for the last 5 years. So he's seen from across the way kind of what that program is about. But and again, it's just that transition. You got to implement a whole new culture, a whole new program. So it doesn't help that it only has 10 starters back either, especially only 3 on offense. So they're going to be breaking in a new quarterback. Kamari Thompson might be that person. But, I think they're going to look at several different guys. Juwan Clark was a very nice running back last year. He'll settle into that lead role this year with Latavian Larry having graduated. Their top 3 wide receivers all graduated, and there's Holtzapfel on the offensive line as well. So again, it's going to be about establishing a identity, especially on offense, early on under Coach Cedar, with a lot of new faces, with a lot of people who just haven't had a chance to perform at the varsity level. Their defense is in a little bit better shape. They do have 7 returning starters. Jalen DeLance on the defensive line is a college prospect. Kevion Curry and Jordan Colston at linebacker give them a pair of nice players in the middle. And Samuel Inyang in the secondary is a returning starter and all-district performer. So they have a little bit more, proven commodities on the defense. But again, it's a first year, it's a transition year, and it's in a tough district. It's going to be, it's a tough road ahead. So we'll just kind of see how quickly they can kind of make that turnaround off a 3-7 season a year ago.
As far as I totally forgot to ask what your outlook was for Horn, so let's just combo up those two. Just talk a bit about just kind of your preliminary expectations on what you feel like can be accomplished for both Horn and North Mesquite, 2 teams that are probably going to be at it's fair to say probably at different ends of the 11-6A spectrum, just based on circumstance.
Horn, certainly the expectation is to make the playoffs. I mean, they're going for their 11th straight playoff appearance, the longest active Mesquite ISD streak in terms of doing so, and there's no reason to think they can't. When you return the district MVP, Jermaine Givens and the pieces around him, they're not going to be satisfied by just making the playoffs. They're the reigning district champions, and they expect to compete. And I expect them to be right there at the end, as one of the top competitors for that. North Mesquite, again, it's a little bit tougher to call because not only are you seeing the coaching staff and that product for the first time, but even if they had the same coaching staff coming back, you're seeing a lot of these players for the first time. It's just a tough district to navigate. Yeah. If they can, similar to Mesquite, if they can pull off a couple wins early on, kind of build some confidence, maybe they can catch a kind of ride a wave of momentum, pull an upset or 2. and get there and work their way into the playoff conversation. But it's just going to be really tough in the first year.
Are they having to adjust much as far as the schemes? Is Coach Cedar coming in and just kind of revamping the system, or just?
I mean, you're always going to have variations and different looks. I mean, and North Mesquite's been kind of one of those teams that have adopted their offensive style to their personnel.
Yeah.
When they had Jacques Gooch a couple of years ago, who was a dynamic dual threat, they geared their offense toward that. When they had more of a traditional pocket passer type, like they did before him and like they did last season, then they tweaked their offense toward that. And I think he's doing a similar thing. I think they're looking at their personnel and adapting the right offensive mindset to best utilize that.
Okay. So as far as then your game to watch out of 11-6A, where did you fall in this? What is the one game that folks should have circled on their 11-6A calendar this season?
October 12th.
Okay.
Horn at Longview. I'm not going to say that's going to be a de facto district championship game, because I have made that proclamation on some other games to watch, but it's certainly going to be a big player in who wins that district title. It's at Lobo Stadium, which is one of the true home field advantages out there, and it's a place, it's almost akin to Highlander Stadium, where Highland Park plays, to where it doesn't matter. The ball just seems to bounce Highland Park's way when they play at home. And the same thing tends to happen, or coaches will kind of mention it. The same thing tends to happen out in Longview. It's a tough place to play for especially for the local teams, because it's a 3-hour bus ride to get out there, and then they pack that stadium. They sell out every week, and it's really an incredible atmosphere every time they play. But yeah, October 12th last year, that was kind of Horn's coming out party, was in that district opener. They just took advantage of a slew of Longview turnovers, ended up winning 52-34. And that was really ultimately the difference in them being able to hold off Longview for the district championship. And Longview is not used to losing district games, period. I mean, they'd won 10 out of the last 12 district titles. And they're certainly not used to losing to Mesquite schools. Since 2004, when they really kind of became a fixture in that district, it hasn't been every year, but they've been, for a majority of the time they've been in that district with the Mesquite schools, they're 26-4 against Mesquite ISD. So they're not used to losing to Mesquite, and they're certainly not used to being drubbed like they were last year. I mean, they were down, I think, 42-10 at the half. And I mean, just reading their social media, the Longview folks were just going crazy because they just didn't know how to act. And so, obviously, like I say, it's going to be huge as far as the race for the district title. But you add in the revenge factor that Longview, that game has not been erased from their memories, and they are going to want revenge, and it's a home game, and they understand the importance of it in the big picture anyway. So that's the one I'm really looking forward to.
You mentioned just that home field advantage out in Longview, and I remember back when I first started the paper, my first season covering high school football was in 2009, and that was right fresh off Allen's first ever state championship. And then the following season, that 2009 opener was at Longview.
Oh, okay.
And sure enough, after the thrill of victory from 2008, right out of the gates, they're dealt a 28-25 loss at Lobo Stadium. So it's legit, yeah. No matter the caliber of the opponent. So yeah, that's obviously Horn and Longview, definitely a very worthy candidate for the biggest game in 11-6A. As far as your top four out of this, which should be another competitive district schedule, obviously John Tyler won't factor into the mix this year, so it might open things up a little bit. But just kind of how do you foresee the top four in this district shaking out?
I'm going to roll with the I guess it's maybe a cop out, but until you're dethroned as champions, you're still the champion. I do think that Horn's it's going to be tough. I mean, there's three. I think Horn, Longview, and Rockwall. It wouldn't surprise me if any of those teams won the district championship. But I think Horn, again, and I think Jermaine Givens is that difference maker. I think, they have the pieces around him. I think their defense is going to be solid. I think their skill guys are good. But I think Jermaine Givens, I mean, he's the reigning MVP. Wouldn't surprise me if he won it again. I think that they are the team to beat, and I think they certainly have the tools to defend that title. Longview, again, is going to be right there. They have 11 returning starters, but 8 on offense. And Haynes King is taking over as the full-time starter at quarterback. He's the coach's son, John King's. And Kalen Williams is back at running back. They have an outstanding defense with several Division I prospects over there. So I look at them for them to finish second. Rockwall, again, as always have an explosive offense. Jacob Clark is back as returning starter at quarterback. Jackson Smith, the wide receiver, was one of the most impressive players I saw all season long last year.
I remember you raving about that kid at the start of last season.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, there's, we're supposed to kind of keep quiet, and some members of the press do that better than others. I think I pride ourselves on actually being pretty professional up there.
No cheering in the press box, too.
I mean, there are some areas of the state that get a little bit vocal. I'm not going to point out who. But Jackson Smith was one of those that even when you're trying not to make, you can't help yourself sometimes just kind of going, God, did you see that? He was just that kind of athlete. So I have Rockwell third, but again, that top three is so close. It's so hard to call. But Horn, Longview, Rockwell, and then fourth I have Tyler Lee.
Okay.
I think it's going to be. I think Kurt Traylor has a track record of success everywhere he's been as an assistant, and that Tyler Lee program had been in such turmoil with coaching changes over the last 5 years. He came in, he added some stability. They have an outstanding running back in Ladarius Wickware, who's going to be a 3-year starter. And if you look at their offensive line, they have 4 returning offensive linemen starters, and they're big and they're good. And so when you have a seasoned offensive line like that and a talent like Ladarius Wickware on running back, I think that's enough. If their defense could do enough, I think that's enough to give them a slight edge over Rockwell Heath, Mesquite, North Mesquite.
Alrighty, well, that is a look at District 11 6A. That'll do it for this edition of the Star Local Media Sports Podcast. We've got 2 districts left. On Thursday, we'll be back to discuss District 9 6A. And in the meantime, folks, Devin, obviously very much appreciated for carrying this podcast and stopping by. Taylor, you the same. Folks, we'll be back on Thursday with another edition of the podcast. You keep enjoying your week, and we will talk to y'all later.